Welcome back to another edition of the podcast, and tonight is our Gameweek 10 National League preview and predictions. As always, I'm joined by my co-host, Paul Franklin. Paul, firstly, how are you doing tonight?
Yeah, good, mate. I'm good. How are you doing in your new abode?
Yeah, as you can say, I said it on the podcast we did last week, didn't I? That I've been kind of a new accommodation. I actually did a podcast on Sunday, and I've kind of changed things around a bit. I've got no background at the moment, but you can probably see me a little bit more clearer now. But now I'm having a bit odd at first, obviously, when you move in. I'm not actually like sharing my room with anyone. So when I moved in on Sunday, I was kind of a bit like on my own. You know what I mean? It's kind of an experience for me. But yeah, I've got in with a group of lads now, so hopefully I'm going to be all right for the next couple of years or so. But no, how are you anyway, Paul?
I'm all right. I understand are you going out after this, aren't you? I'm going off to bed. You're going out. That's the difference, isn't it? Now, so
yeah, we're off to an
enjoy
night
that uni
tonight,
life.
so. Yeah, so I'm kind of in the full swing of it now. We've gone out one night before this, but yeah, tonight's the one I'm particularly looking forward to because it's indie music, which is kind of my thing, if you get what I mean. But no, please let us know your thoughts in the comments on all the latest topics that we're going to be discussing tonight. Of course, there's plenty to discuss. And I think the first thing that we need to discuss is Sutton United. Of course, Steve Morrison is now the fifth manager in the National League to be sacked. The U's currently sit 22nd in the division with only 5 points from a possible of 27. Yeah, for me, probably the right decision. I think Sutton were a side that a lot of people had quite high expectations for before a ball was kicked, and they currently sit in the bottom four. So it's not been the ideal start. And of course, they've made the decision to let Steve Morrison go.
Yeah, not surprised. I think we spoke about those that were potentially under threat over the last couple of weeks, Luke, and he was one that was certainly mentioned. You know, I think he did very well last year. We talked extensively on Steve Morrison and his almost restructure program that he did with the team after they dropped out of League Two. Got rid of all those that had suffered the relegation and sort of brought in a lot of new blood and a lot of youngsters. And I'd actually predicted them to go straight up. I hadn't realised that they were going to restructure and regroup like they probably did. And you know, their consolidation was okay last season. And I think then there was that expectation, I guess, from their fans as well as anybody else, probably more from their fans, obviously, than anybody else, that they would kick on and maybe be a playoff team. And it just hasn't materialised. You know, I had them to finish eighth in the table, you know, at the end of the season. I genuinely thought they would push on a little bit. And for whatever reason, you know, he spent some money in the summer. Was his recruitment as effective as it could have been? You know, we don't know. We'll see that when a new manager comes in, we'll see what sort of tune he'll get out of the squad that they have there. I think, you know, losing in the National League Cup in the week was probably the straw that broke the camel's back, and they've decided to make that change. And I'm not wholly surprised like you, mate.
No, I'm not either. I thought last season, to be fair, I think a lot of people, when they come down into this division, I think it's like any side, when you get relegated, there's that initial expectation, isn't there, that, you know, we need to be competing at the top. And although Sutton did finish mid-table, I thought that was a very respectable position for them last season. You know, they had a massive turnover in players. However, the second season in the National League, for me, Sutton, who aren't particularly a basket case, I feel there's that expectation there for them to, you know, kick on this season now and be aiming for the playoffs. And I think, you know, with the recruitment that they did in the summer, I think a lot of people felt that was very realistic for them to be able to, you know, push on and compete for that top seven. And, you know, it's still early. We have to admit that if this appointment is spot on, which it will need to be, there's still potential there for them to be able to break into the top seven come the end of the season. However, it's certainly not been the ideal start for them. You know, we spoke about last season them having a large turnover. They've had a turnover this season of 30 players, you know, which is quite a large amount as well, considering that it's the same manager. You know, it's not like a new man's come in and and kind of brought in his own players. He's kind of added to last season's squad, yet they had a turnover of 30 players. But those 13 new players who came in were quite well-established National League players, or potentially players from the lower leagues who actually were star players, in the National League South particularly. And I think when you bring in and you're heavily backed, like I think the Sutton manager was, there's that expectation that, you need to perform now. We've backed you, you've been able to bring in your own players. And based on the first 8 or 9 games for Sutton, it's not been the ideal start for them at all. Like I've mentioned, sitting in the bottom 4. I think a lot of Sutton fans, based on social media, were particularly happy to see that Steve Morrison has been dismissed. I have a bit of sympathy, but then again, I think it's the right decision. I thought he did an okay job last season, to be fair, for Sutton, and I think it's just a little bit disappointing that he's probably not gone how he thought it might have done in the early stages of this season. But in terms of a new manager, then, we're going to have a look at some potential replacements. I think the dream that a lot of Sutton fans are wanting would be Adam Hinchelwood. Of course, right. Attacking-minded manager. Previously been at York, we're all aware of him. A lot of the players at Sutton, he's of course managed in the past, but also played against. He'll be well aware of him from his time at Worthing. So that'd be the ideal one for me. Do you feel that's realistic, or do you think Adam Hinchelwood will be looking to potentially go for a club in a better position in the National League or in League Two?
Do you know, I think it will be a good fit. It really depends what Adam Hinchelwood wants to do, Luke. Like you said, is he clambering for a League Two job? Is he trying to go for the higher National League job? He did amazing work with York, almost got promoted. So he's off good stock. He was a good stock anyway because of what he did with Worthing, and the brand of football he plays is attractive to a lot of fans wanting him to come and take their team. And I have no idea about his personal circumstances. Is he now based in York? Is he based back in Worthing? Is he happy to relocate, or is he looking for somewhere further north? It's a really difficult one because the problem is not, jobs will come about, but not the jobs that everyone wants straight away. So, does he apply for this? Does he get it and take it? And then around the corner, another job comes up that would have been more suited to him location wise, or, the fact Sutton are full time, got a fair sized squad. I have no idea on their budget, but they seem to spend okay in the league. They're well placed. They're surely going to have ambitions to get back into the EFL because they've tasted that now, having come from the lower leagues over the years, got into the EFL. They'll want to go back there. I'm pretty sure of that, and their fans will certainly want to do that. So, I think Adam Hinchelwood is an excellent shout. It depends whether Sutton take their time in trying to find the right person. Normally, we see that if a club sacks someone, they generally appoint someone almost straight away. Wycombe Wanderers today have lost their manager and appointed Michael Duff almost immediately.
Mm-hmm.
York did it with Stuart Maynard when Hinchelwood went. But surprisingly, Yeovil took their time. Solihull, Moors are taking their time. Will Sutton be similar, or do they have someone in mind that maybe announced tomorrow as an example, ready for the weekend? So, I think Adam Hinchelwood is definitely the one that I look in on social media is who the fans would like. I know there's a couple of bloggers that have stated that he would be a great fit with the type of squad that Sutton have, that young, sort of exciting, energetic squad. So I'd like to see him back in football because he plays a really good brand of football and he's well liked, and I think it would be a really good fit.
If you were in Adam Hinchelwood's position, let's say you'd done the job that he did at York City in terms of first season, second place finish, of course fell short in the playoffs, but obviously I think overall York fans, he leaves the club, I think York City fans overall will be happy with him. They'll kind of appreciate him. I don't think there's any negativity towards him since he's left. But for you personally, if you were in his position now, do you feel that you'd look at the Sutton job and potentially think, well, that's below me. I shouldn't have been sacked by York? I should be in League Two.
No, I don't think so. When he took the York job, and I know York have got a huge amount of potential in terms of the money that might be spent by Ugler and his mum and etc. But Adam Hinchell would look at Sutton. They've got 1 win in 9 games. The team, as John Johnson said there, they beat Carlisle. Ironically, they've beaten one of the stronger teams in the league. Hinchwood is going to look at that and say, I can get them from where they are, 4th from bottom, into the playoffs at least. And I think if someone like him is given the job, you got to like to think that that's where they could probably end up or want to end up. So I don't think any manager will look at it and say it's below me. I think they've got to look at it as an opportunity based on the conversations they have with owners and chairmen and boards in relation to what the ambition is of that club alongside their own ambition. And we see it a lot with managers, don't they? The project, their ambitions match mine, their ideas match mine, and that's really where it's got to be. So I don't think it's a case of where they are now; it's a case of where they want to be and how they might get there. And will Hinchwood be the person that can help them get to that point? And I think he's shown with Worthing and York that he remember he took York on, and they were not good.
Yeah, they were in a similar position to Sutton.
Were they ever like to get ready? Probably not, but they were on the edge, weren't they, Luke? And he started, and he's taken them to that next level and almost got them into the Football League. So I see what you mean about Hinchwood. Is it a little bit of a beyond here, below him? I don't think so. I think it's based on what the conversations these managers have in terms of where the ambition lies.
Just some other names as well that have come up in conversation today. Steve Cottrell, of course, previously beaten at Forest Green Rovers. I think in terms of the actual name, Steve Cottrell, and what he's done in his managerial career, sounds good. For me personally, is that the perfect fit for Sutton, considering the actual squad? No. Scott Davis. Now, this is one for me that I would like to see. It's just whether Scott Davis would actually leave Slough Town from the league below. Of course, some of the players that left Slough in the summer to go to Sutton, Scott Davis was actually managing last season in the likes of Ogbonna for Sutton. So I would actually like to see that. And I think what he's done at Slough as a player manager as well in the last couple of years, I personally feel I think he deserved an opportunity at Sutton. It's just whether he'd like to take it. And the other one as well is Dal McMahon, I should say. Of course, I think Ebbsfleet manager at the moment. A lot of people would like to see that one. For me personally, I wouldn't. I think there's probably better managers out there when I remember what he did in the National League with Dagenham last time he was in this division. Out of those other names, potentially as if Hinchwood is unrealistic, I think we can both agree that's probably the first choice option, isn't it? But if you're looking, let's say he's off the table, who would you pick out of the other three?
I mean, Darren McMahon. Would Darren McMahon leave Ebbsfleet? I don't know whether they're full time or not. Whether he's full time, even though the team isn't. They're gonna be fighting to try and improve in the league they're in and get promoted. And I think he'll be happy there. And it'll take a lot to entice someone like that to leave the club they're in. Yeah. I think a more realistic target could be someone like Scott Davis at Slough, because they are part time. They're going alongside the big boys in National League South. They don't have a big budget, and they compete well. Lee Allenson from Hemel Hempstead Town as well is another one that sort of come up through the ranks and done well, a little bit like Hinchwood did. It really depends if Sutton are going to look outside the box, Luke, and look at that type of appointment rather than go for that tried and tested method of Cottrell, of McMahon, who was a lad at Eastleigh that was at Dagenham as well.
But he's at Dagenham at the moment, though, isn't he? Lee Bradbury, I believe.
I can't remember the centre forward. The name's
Davis.
A name like that, So. Do you know what? I wouldn't want to be a chairman having to select a manager at the moment, because it is so tough, because you just have no idea whether they're going to be a fit.
Well, there's an expectation, isn't there, as well, particularly at Sutton. There's that thing that a manager needs to come in and the fans are going to they're not going to want an underwhelming appointment, if that makes sense, are they, at Sutton? They're going to want to bring in a name as such. And the two big names, of course, are Steve Cottrell and Adam Hinchelwood. I think we can both agree that Adam Hinchelwood would be the ideal appointment. You know, if he was at Sutton, I think everyone would be really impressed, and everyone would see that Sutton are in quite a ambitious club potentially. But the thing is that going to be realistic at the moment for Sutton?
I think so. I mean, then, like you said, Luke, they're not a basket case. They're well run. They've got a half decent squad. You know, is Morrison not got a tune out of them? We don't know. It's definitely a job that would appeal to somebody. They won't be short of applications. It just depends who the board and the chairman want to go with, and do they go with a left field choice? Do they go with a new manager coming into the league? I think they probably would go with that more than maybe a tried and tested one. And I think Hinchelwood should and probably is top of the list, if not near the top of the list of those that are available. But he's not. He's going to be the top of the list of somebody. I think, you know, he's well liked. He's well respected. He plays good football. He's done well with York. We don't know what went on over the summer for him to be booted after 4 games. It's just one of those things. And he'll want to get back in as soon as he can.
Please remember to like and subscribe to the podcast. It genuinely does go a long way if you could do that, and you won't miss a live stream or an episode when it is up on YouTube. Moving on to Morecambe then. Of course, they've made 4 additions in the last 24 hours. 2 midfielders from QPR, I should say, in Emerson Sutton, of course, on loan. And Dixon Bonner, who of course has got quite a lot of experience in the EFL, previously being at Liverpool before he was at QPR. And then the other 2 names being, I might butcher this name, Kikari, I think it is, who's come on loan from Arsenal. And then Arjun Raki. They don't help me out, Morecambe, with the last names that they bring in. He's come on loan from Boston. Of course, he's made 4 appearances for Boston so far this season. So 4 more additions for Morecambe now, which takes them up to a 27-man squad.
I know it's crazy, isn't it? I mean, the new manager with his links to academy football, and you know, when he was at Notts County, and his coaching credentials through that sort of element of football, I guess, the academy element, he certainly using his little black book wisely in terms of players. I think the challenge with Morecambe is, Luke, is knowing what his best 11 is. I think at the moment he keeps chucking new players in, or he's bringing new players in. You know, does he know which 11 are going to fit? Does he know what formation to put them in? And it's all well and good just drafting players and recruiting players and loaning players in, but ultimately they've got to fit what you want. And you know, at some point with 27 players on the book, they're a brand new team as such with new owners. You know, their money's not going to last forever as it is. So he's going to have to make some quick decisions. You know, he can't go another 5, 6, 7 games and he lose them all because he's still deciding where he's going to be at, because all of a sudden he'll have 1 win in 15, and that's no good for anybody, you know, when you're trying to survive in the league, because that's all they've got to try and do this season, is survive in this league.
100%.
And you know, if they end up projecting like he suggests they will, and they'll be one of the best teams in the National League, then so be it. But at this moment in time, they're shipping goals, they're not scoring goals. Are the players he got in match fit? I'm not suggesting they're not fit, but are they match fit? Because I think a lot of them haven't played.
They're in a difficult position though, aren't they, Mark? When you think about it, like, of course, you know, they started recruiting 5 or 6 games into the season. By that point, if we're being brutally honest, the players that are available are probably desperate. They're desperate for a football club, let's be brutally honest here. So they're in a difficult position. However, what I will say, and it's kind of a question to you, this: when does it start becoming an expectation for Morecambe to actually pick up in terms of results for the new manager? Of course, you can kind of give him a little bit of leeway because of, everything that's going off the field in the past and, the recruitment side of things. But, he has actually come out and said they're going to be a very good team in the future. When do you feel as supporters and, analysts of the National League, there's that expectation where we could potentially criticise him, if that makes sense, for not being able to bring in results?
Listen, the problem we've got is they've won 1 in 6. The other one's only a draw. So they've won 1 and drawn 1 in 6. Like I said, he can't go another 6-7 games and only pick up another 4 points. That's 8 points in 17 games. They're playing catch up as is. They're going to have to do Tuesday, Saturday for a little bit to catch up. And I think, any fan realistically will look at Morecambe and say, Morecambe fans themselves will say, we just got to survive this season after the start we've had. They're behind the 8 ball. They're playing catch up. And he's doing very, very well in recruiting what looks like seemingly good quality. But he's got to make that work. And it's all well and good just going, I have him. And I should imagine there's more to it than just picking these guys off and saying, I have them because they're available. But at some point, he's got to decide what his best 11 is with his 5 or 6 substitutes to then start picking up points and start to show a bit of consistency. Otherwise, fans will get unsettled because you don't want to be going into, September, October, November in the bottom 4 and not having any decent run of form either. So, we've seen with any National League team, Luke, teams will go on runs where they can win 6 or 7 in a row. They can lose 6 or 7 in a row. And Morecambe may well do that. What they don't want to do is end up being too far behind and it not make an effect on them getting up the table. If anything, you can see them doing a bit of what like Boston did from Christmas onwards. That run and it all clicking and then they go. But at some point, he's got to settle, stop recruiting and decide what he's got out of those 27.
If we look at the next 5 fixtures for Morecambe as well in their favour, well, potentially, it's just an expectation there with these next 5 fixtures. They are all winnable, in my opinion. Of course, they face both of our clubs in the next 10 days or so. They've got Wealdstone at home on Saturday, which, no disrespect to Wealdstone, but you're at home to a side that, although they've started well, I think there's that expectation that they're part-time. We've got to beat them. They've then got Halifax, who probably haven't had the ideal start. I'll admit that. If I was a Morecambe fan, I'd be looking at Halifax and saying that's a winnable game. Then after that, they've got Gateshead, who are in a very similar position to Halifax, before playing Tamworth away as well. Before playing Truro away, who have only won himself this season, and Tamworth away after that. If I look at those fixtures, for me, this is where it starts to become the expectation there, where they're going to be winning them. If you look at the previous 5, for example, Boreham Wood away have had a great start. That's away. Forest Green at home. Forest Green are flying. And Aldershot, of course, away from home. They're capable of scoring goals. A lot of energy in that side. I wasn't surprised that they took them to the sword. But they're getting to a point now, if you actually look at Morecambe, where players should be getting fit now. They should be at a point where, they're picking up results. And I look at those next 5 fixtures, and if they want to survive, they need to be picking up about 8 or 9 points, in my opinion.
They definitely do. And John Joseph said, I sort of stated Morecambe was struggling to score goals. They've scored 4 in one game last week. But they have only scored 7 over the whole 6 games. And, I think for Wealdstone's sake and those that are coming up next is, hopefully Morecambe don't start scoring goals, because that ultimately is going to win them football matches. If they can score goals, they're going to do okay and they'll pick up more points. So that could be ominous. They got 4 at the weekend and will start to improve in that sense. So, listen, they need to look at the next 3, 4, 5 games and work out what they want to do from there. Does the manager use those 3 or 4 or 5 games to choose his best 11 and his best formation? Because the players coming in this week are going to need 3 or 4 games to settle in. The players coming in 2 weeks ago are still going to need 3 or 4 games to potentially settle in. So all of a sudden, you're 3 or 4 or 5 games on and still trying to work out what your best team, and they're still trying to get used to the league and everything else. So, I think I say it often, and it's a very cliche thing, but winning breeds sort of confidence, that breeds winning, that breeds confidence, and you get that mentality. And Morecambe have got to get into that stride. They won their first game, but didn't really kick on, so they need to get a win under their belt just to sort of help them along their way, get a bit of confidence, and go on from there.
Moving on from Morecambe, and we'll go on to Chris Clarke. It's kind of becoming quite a repetitive thing to talk about on the podcast. Of course, we're all aware that 3 clubs are all looking to actually bring in the attacking midfielder. Of course, formerly being at Altrincham, he last played in the 23-24 season, scoring 2 goals. I think I'm right in saying goals and assists combined, he had the most goal contributions in the division that season too. The 3 clubs, of course, that realistically can bring him in, and I think it's been publicly known as well, is, of course, Carlisle United, Forest Green Rovers, and York City. Now, the Peterborough chairman, of course, has got his own podcast, and he's, of course, come out today and kind of given us a little bit more news on that. And Matt Ugler's actually responded to it as well, which I'm not surprised with, of course, the York owner. Peterborough's owner actually announced that York City turned down the opportunity to loan in Chris Conn-Clarke. If I'm being honest, I think that's probably a good decision, which a lot of people will definitely disagree with. But I just think York are already stacked in that position. It will just unsettle the squad bringing in another player. Carlisle United have been given the opportunity to bring him in themselves, who I think we both agreed on last week's podcast would be the ideal place for him to go, particularly when you think of him linking back up with Regan Linney. They're yet to, of course, make a decision on bringing in Chris Conn-Clarke. And then the final one is Forest Green Rovers, who he's come out and said are leading the way to bring in the attacking midfielder at the moment. When you think of all those 3 clubs, Forest Green, Carlisle and York, when it's Forest Green the most likely to bring him in, what's your thoughts on that?
Well, when you're towards the top end of the table, if you've got the opportunity to strengthen, then you should take it. I don't think you should relax and go, "We're top of the table. We've got a decent squad." If you can strengthen in any area, and we've spoken to Robbie Savage, and we understand what his ideas are around what he wants to do with Forest Green. He'll be ruthless enough to say, "Well, Chris Conn-Clarke could improve my team in certain areas, in certain aspects." What surprises me, Luke, is it's taken so long for someone to pick him up and deals to be done, because he's a quality footballer at National League level. He's not being played at Peterborough. Peterborough have made it quite clear they want to get shot of him to loan him out or sell him to what they believe is the top end of the National League. York have come out today. I think Stuart Maynard has said in interviews that they're not looking to get Chris Conn-Clarke in. Mark Hughes is non-committal. So, I wouldn't be surprised over next week if this deal's done and he ends up at Forest Green and imagine having him and Nick Horton in their attacking midfield areas, their wide areas. In the front, in the final third areas is quite a frightening prospect, and I don't think that will be lost on someone like Robbie Savage. If someone like Chris Conn-Clarke becomes available, you've got to go in and try and get him. You don't want to upset your squad. You don't want to upset the equilibrium of what you've got already, and they're doing very well. But, I think anyone will be, if they're in the position to be able to get someone like him in, then they should take it.
Worth pointing out, of course, coming actually said Peterborough taking I won't say that. With the asking price, there's a chance he doesn't go anywhere. Yeah, that's something he has come out and said as well. He said, the owner's come out and said, he's not a pushover. There's a reason that these clubs are wanting him. And when he looks at his form that he had at, of course, Altrincham, he's not just going to let him go. I think what the Peterborough owners kind of wanting to do is loan him out to potentially one of the 3 clubs. And then potentially January comes around when the window's open for all the Football League sides, and then he can probably sell him on for more money, or sell him to one of these clubs for probably above the price that you may price someone like that, because one of these 3 sides are probably desperate to bring him in. Let's be honest, I think any National League side would happily take Chris Conn-Clarke off Peterborough's hands, but it's probably one of those 3 clubs that's realistically going to be able to actually bring him in. I think we've both made it clear. I don't know if you agree with me, but I think Carlisle would be the perfect place for him to go. But
I've seen Carlisle play this season, and they're very, 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 very good, very strong up top. And if you've got Conn-Clarke playing in behind their forward line, then they're going to be a real threat, and he may be the missing piece in terms of kicking on and overtaking Forest Green and York and all those sorts of those teams at the top end. So let's watch this space, see where he ends up. Hopefully Peterborough will allow him to go, not too demanding on whatever the costs are involved, and he ends up back in the National League, because as National League fans we like to see that sort of quality in the division. The only time you don't want to see it is if they're playing against your team. But other than that, you like to see the likes of Conn-Clarke, in the division without a doubt.
Final topic that I want to talk about before we get on to doing our predictions for the upcoming game week is we reflect on our predictions that we did before ball was kicked this season. If there was one team for you, Paul, and I'll give my answer as well, or one prediction, I should say, of a team that you're like, I've certainly got that wrong now and I'd happily change it, what would that be for you?
I did have a look at this, and I know we're only less than 10 games in. So they're not dissimilar to what we've chosen. I think the obvious one, I think yours is probably similar, Luke, is I put Sutton in 8th and then our second sort of third.
I don't know, me, because I think they're a side for me that I think I think there's potential there. We saw them beat Carlisle, so then they're not mine, actually. I think they could potentially come good if this appointment's right.
That's fair. I mean, I looked at them and I looked at Boreham Wood, where I placed 16th, who are now in the top 7. You look at those two teams. Will Sutton go on a run and improve immensely from what they've started in, the first sort of quarter of the season? And will Boreham Wood be able to maintain what they've started, being a new team in the league? Albeit, they have vast experience at National League level with their manager and the majority of their squad. So I had those two sort of ringed, really. And I suppose at this moment in time, as it stands, I would say that I probably wouldn't place Sutton as high as 8th now. I'm not suggesting that they'll be where they are at the bottom, but if I had my choice again, I think I would place Sutton probably in the bottom half of the table as it stands.
They're not mine, because I think I'm actually going to look at those that I've kind of under-predicted, I think, and pick one of those, because I think Boreham Wood, for me, when I've seen them and I think about it now, the more I think about it, I think that is a silly prediction where I put them, just surviving relegation, because they've got a manager who knows this league like the back of his hand. I think it's been proven. He's well aware of what happened last time, I think, where they kind of probably took his eye off the ball in terms of potentially going down. And that's probably what did cost them. However, I think what he's done to come back to the club, getting back promoted, for me overall, deserves an enormous amount of plaudits. And I think he's come back and got them promoted. And I think so far this season, they've had an excellent start. And they've got a lot of players that are experienced National League players. Now, I'm not saying that they're going to make the playoffs. I still don't think they will. But I can't see them just narrowly avoiding relegation. I think they'll probably be high in the table this season with the experience that they've got. I think going forward as well, if you look at the amount of goals that they've scored, it's a bit unheard of with Boreham Wood. They've always been known as a very defensively strong side that seem to grind out results. Whereas this season, they're actually scoring a lot of goals. They've got a couple of two strikers in Rush and Norris who have already got the ball rolling, scoring 4 goals each so far this season. Alongside Enrique Sousa as well, who's someone I've always admired in this division. I remember him when he was at Grimsby on the wing, and I thought, he's a talented player. And I think Grimsby fans always used to say to me that on the ball he's very good, but he's got no end product. And I think that was the case with Boreham Wood. And I feel like now it does feel like how he started the season, he's got that end product. And I think when I look at Boreham Wood, he's got to be the marquee player so far. You've got those 3 going forward alongside Zach Brunt as well in the attacking midfield role, who others have said in the past on his day, he's the best player in the National League in the past. To have him in that attacking midfield role, coming from Barnet is excellent. And you've got a very reliable defence as well. For me, overall, it's got all the foundations for a playoff push. And the more I think about it, I think I'm going to have a bit of egg on my face come the end of the season, to be honest. Scunthorpe, of course, they've started well. I think they'll probably finish a bit higher, but I'm still not overboard with them, although they are still unbeaten. I just feel if injuries happen to them, the likes of Carl Roberts, I see it having a detrimental effect where I think Boreham Wood, as a team overall, can probably cope without those players injured, if that makes sense.
No, you're right. I mean, I had Scunthorpe down in 19th, and they're, and Wealdstone at 20th. They're both proving us wrong at this moment in time. I think Scunthorpe would probably be better placed to stay in those sorts of positions than maybe Wealdstone will be longer term. But I think you're right. That's a good shout as well. And as I say, I had Boreham Wood, but I think just Sutton being as far behind as they are already that's going to take some run, and it will be hinge on who they appoint. And I think they get the appointment right. You're right, Luke. They can kick on and end up where we expect them to be at the beginning of the season. But I would suggest that they're going to be probably more mid-table than they are at the moment, than I had predicted, rather.
Yeah, I look back at certain scenarios where they've made early managerial changes, and it's had such a significant impact on them, positive impact as well. I think I know it's a long time ago now, but Dave Challoner at Stockport. I remember them; they were really struggling under Russ, I should say, when they were last in this division, and I think Dave Challoner came in and they went on to win the league. And it was probably at this point that I think Dave Challoner came in for them. And there's been other scenarios as well where they've made early managerial changes and it's had a positive effect. I think if I'm being honest, I don't think Sutton will make I had them 8th anyway, but I don't think they'll finish 8th. But I think there's predictions when I look overall that are going to look worse at the end of the season, unless I say, at Mick now that, I've made a mistake here. And I think there's more chance of Boreham Wood finishing 19th for me than Sutton not making the 8th place, if that makes sense overall.
Yeah, no, that's fair. That's a fair comment. And, Junior Mariah's fan club sort of said it, all it takes is 3 or 4 games, and soon enough you're on a 10-game losing streak. And that's completely right. We've seen it with Eastleigh, who are hugely inconsistent in the league over the last few years. As an example, we saw how good it was going the other way for Boston last season, and the fact that they were excellent and able to sort of pull themselves out of it. We saw it with Forest Green at the top end, where they weren't able to really string a load of games together and suffered in the playoffs. So you're right. The most consistent teams, be it winning or losing, will end up sort of being near the top or near the bottom. And you've just got to show a level of consistency that's positive.
Right, I think we're at a point now where we're going to move on to our National League predictions for the upcoming game weeks. Please come in with your comments as well, your predictions for the game weeks too, specific games. And also, if there's any topics that you'd like us to quickly touch on, then we will if you put a comment in as well. And we do apologise if there's any that we do miss out to. For those that want to play along, you can as well. I'm going to put a video shortly so you'll know how to. But in terms of the scores on the doors, these are the scores at the moment. And it was very good last week. It's a good score as well this week in terms of the entertainment side of the Predictions League. We've been quite lucky, haven't we, in terms of every season, it's always kind of gone down to the final few game weeks. It's not been where it's won, by 10 game weeks remaining, if that makes sense. And, it's looking like it's going to be quite a good race this season, isn't it?
I think, 50, I think it will be, Luke. I think we drew 6-6 last week. I think we're not doing too badly, really, in terms of getting the results right. Scores is always a little bit more difficult, but I think we're not doing too bad with results overall over the last few weeks. And 50 points already into this season is not so bad. So it's nice to see that we're even going into the 10th, 11th game of the season. So
If you would like to play along, this is how you do so. Please remember to like and subscribe, as I've mentioned earlier. Over 60 people watching at the moment, so I would genuinely appreciate it if you can press that like button too. And of course, if you're watching afterwards, which the majority do, then I'd appreciate you to do that as well. But this is how you play along. Right then, so the first game that we're going to preview is, of course, Brackley Town, who've had a very respectable start in the National League this season after promotion from the National League North. Of course, they're facing Sutton United, who we've already spoke on in quite detail tonight after the recent dismissal of Steve Morrison. John Meaney, of course, the interim manager for Sutton United, will be taking charge of this fixture. Do you think the sacking of Steve Morrison is going to give Sutton any boost here, or do you think Brackley will get all 3 points?
I don't know. Do you know what, Luke? Brackley have got 4 draws in 5, and Sutton have got 4 losses in 5. So teams that aren't exactly banging form, they haven't got a new manager as such. It depends how they get on with the interim manager, John Meehan. I've looked at this, and Brackley are a tough nut to crack. You know, they're holding their own a little bit in the league at the moment. Someone suggested, strength in depth and injuries and suspension. I think John Johnson was mentioned earlier. That may come into play for someone like Brackley later in the season. But at the moment, they're holding their own. I've gone with a 2-2 draw for this one.
Brackley, for me, I genuinely think they're going to be fine this season. I think they've got all the foundations to be able to establish themselves in the National League. Of course, a lot of draws, but when you're in a position like Brackley, as long as you're picking results up at home, you're probably going to be okay in the National League. And there's been no indication for me so far that they're not going to be okay, if that makes sense, in this division so far. Of course, only 2 defeats in 8 as well for Brackley. We've got to remember that. They're becoming a very hard team to beat, which I think a lot of people expected. And they're coming against the Sutton side, who've just let their manager go, potentially probably don't know the best 11. They've got quite a lot of players there, as we've mentioned. So I'm actually going to go for a Brackley 2-0 win myself too. Someone's actually come in and said, have you spoken about us appointing Danny Webb, of course, the new Yeovil town manager? Now, on Sunday's podcast, I spoke about that when we did one on Sunday. And then, of course, last Thursday, it was very highly rumoured as well that we were going to be appointed. So I think we discussed it on there too. But no, in terms of predictions, I've gone for a 2-0 win. And did you go for a draw, Paul?
2-2, yeah.
2-2 draw. Right, we'll move on to the next fixture that we'll have a look at then, and it will be Aldershot Town versus Hartlepool United. Hartlepool, only 1 defeat for them, yet they have actually had, I think, 6 draws so far this season, or 5 draws it may be. And I think, had an excellent start, didn't they, to the season, and recently particularly slipping up in terms of not getting, all 3 points instead of only picking up 1. As for Aldershot, they've been the league entertainers. The first side that actually stopped Aldershot from scoring at the weekend was actually Carlisle United away from home. It was one of my kind of predictions where I thought potentially it was a bit of a banana skin for Carlisle and Aldershot could cause an upset. And I think a lot of respect to Carlisle that they have comfortably won 2-0. How do you see this one going then, Paul?
Well, it's another matchup where Aldershot have had 3 in 5 draws, and Hartlepool had 4 in 5 draws. So, the first 2 matchups are full of teams that are drawing a lot of the games recently. I've gone for a draw. I've gone for Aldershot 1, Hartlepool 1. Hartlepool very miserly, aren't they? Aldershot do let goals in, they do score goals. I just got a feeling this will buck the trend a little bit, so I've gone with Aldershot 1, Hartlepool 1.
Snap, and I thought my prediction was a bit of a shock, because obviously Aldershot score so many goals in terms of the turnover this season. That's quite a high, low scoring game, but I think Hartlepool defensively for me are very strong, and I think the way they play is probably going to be the reason that they're probably not high scoring. I think they've got the players going forward, Jermaine Francis and Alex Reid, who come in the summer. Between them, they can get a hatful of goals. But I think they're quite, under Grayson, I think they're quite a defensively minded side, if that makes sense, the way they play. And I think away at Aldershot, a point would be a pretty decent point. As for Aldershot, I think there's been a lot of performances for me where they probably warranted more out of those games. But potentially because of the way they play, because they're so open, all it takes is the opposition. The opposition will get opportunities, and if they take the chances, then they're going to score against Aldershot, if that makes sense. And Aldershot, like I mentioned, will give you chances. So I think for Aldershot, it is always a case of being able to outscore the opposition. And against Hartlepool, they're one of the few sides in this division that I think are strong enough to be able to limit Aldershot's chances. And away from home, I can see this being a 1-1 draw. We've had a few people agree with us, 1-1. A few people gone for Hartlepool to actually win, and a few as well have actually gone for the Shots to win too. Quite an unpredictable game, I suppose, this one. It always is with Aldershot though. And moving on to the next fixture, Altrincham versus Carlisle United. Carlisle, if we actually look, although they've got a very good squad on paper, if we look at them overall so far this season, I think in terms of the actual performances at times, there's areas of vulnerability. If I'm being honest, and of course I know Carlisle fans have probably criticised me a little bit, which I think is warranted considering they're actually winning games at the moment. But to be fair, in recent weeks, 3 clean sheets in a row. I think that was the area that I think they were quite vulnerable in, was defensively, and they've certainly tightened up, changed things around a bit. I think Hayden's come out of the team. Terrell Thomas looks a lot more comfortable now there. They're going away to an Altrincham side who've been a very mixed bag so far this season. I think if you look at Altrincham overall as a squad, I actually think defensively, midfield and attack, they're better than last season. I just think they potentially had better individuals going forward last season, if that makes sense, in Regan, Linney and Newby. But I think as a team overall, they're a lot more structured and settled, if that makes sense, overall. But I think based on the way Carlisle are playing at the moment, and the fact that I've kind of written them off in the last couple of weeks, and they've won the matches, I think it'd be unfair for me not to predict a Carlisle United win. So I'm going to go for a 2-1 Carlisle win. But I do think it'll be quite a tricky game against Altrincham. Like I said, I don't think Altrincham are a bad side by any stretch of the imagination. How do you see it going?
No, I mean, when you look at those first 2 matchups, all the draws they've had between them, Altrincham haven't drawn a game yet, and Carlisle have only lost 1 in the last 5, and that's against Sutton. So, 2 teams that are okay. In terms of form, I think Carlisle are a very, very good football team. Regan Linney's going back to Altrincham, and I've gone for a Carlisle 3-1 win, which is similar to what John Johnson said here, with Carlisle to win 3-1, Linney at a double. So, Altrincham fans aren't going to hope that Regan Linney does the double on them, but he's certainly got the potential to do that. Altrincham good football inside. Carlisle very powerful, very, very direct, get the ball into the front too. Those guys up top for Carlisle really do work their socks off. So a good football match in potential there, and I think Carlisle will win 3-1.
Moving on to the next fixture that we're going to have a look at, it will of course be Boston versus Boreham Wood. Boreham Wood, we spoke about them tonight. They've had an excellent start to the season, currently sitting in the top 7 against the Boston side, who I think overall haven't had the ideal start for them, particularly under Coughlin. I think based on the impact he had at Boston in that second half of the season, there's that kind of expectation now that they're going to be able to kick on from last season. And so far, although I don't think they're actually in the bottom 4, it's not been the best of starts for them. However, they did go to Roops Hall last weekend and pick up a result there. which is a very, very, very good point. I still think Boreham Wood, the way they're playing at the moment, they've got so much confidence, a lot of quality going forward. I think they'll probably have just enough to be able to see off Boston. I'm going to go for a 2-1 Boreham Wood win. How do you see it going? You're on mute.
Sorry. I've gone with the Boreham Wood to win 2-0. I think they've only lost one all season. They're doing what they should have done in the last few seasons and scored more goals because they're so good defensively, and that's what really got them into the playoffs. And they've now managed to find a bit of quality going forward, which I think they really suffered with when the last time they were in the National League and got relegated. Boston are just struggling for a bit of momentum and a few goals as themselves. So a tough one for Boston to have to face, a tough team to have to face in their predicament at the moment. And I think Boreham Wood, they comfortably can go away from home and win and get results. I think they'll do that again and they'll win 2-0.
Moving on to the next fixture that we'll have a look at, it will be Eastleigh versus Braintree. Braintree yet to pick up a result away from home so far this season against Eastleigh, who it does feel like it's the same old story with them this season in terms of their inconsistencies. I think always quite heavily recruit in terms of they're not afraid to spend money. Yet it doesn't feel like they ever get the right manager in my opinion, to be able to, compete for the top 7, which I think is the expectation there at Eastleigh. Of course, I saw them last weekend against Halifax, took a 2-0 early lead. And Halifax came back. And if I'm being brutally honest, there's nothing for me from what I've seen of Eastleigh this season that's given me any indication that they're going to be any better than what they've been previously. What's your thoughts on them so far, and what's your thoughts on this fixture?
Two teams not really in a huge amount of form, Luke, is it? One winning 5, maybe 5. A difficult one. I think Eastleigh will win 2-0. That's what I've gone for. Purely just that advantage of them being at home, possibly a bit more quality up front, but just a team that just flat to deceive on a very constant basis. Whereas Braintree are probably doing what we would expect them to do, and that's struggle a little bit in this league this season after surviving last season. And I don't think Braintree are going to get a win this weekend, and Eastleigh will win 2-0.
I agree with you once again. To be fair, Braintree, like I've said, they're the side for me that I think are really going to struggle this season. I think we had them second to bottom, and that was because we only thought Morecambe weren't going to be able to participate this season. And I still think it's the case. I think they had a pretty good first couple of games, didn't they, Braintree? And I think now, I just think there's a lot more better sides than them with better resources, and like a club like Braintree in the position that they were in the summer, where they spent a lot of their money the previous summer. They were always going to be in, it was always going to be an uphill battle this season. And I actually think so far they've had a pretty good start, although they are still in the bottom 4. But away at Eastleigh, like I've said, yet to pick up a result away from home. I'm not particularly too keen with Eastleigh themselves, but I still think they'll probably have a little bit too much for Braintree. So I'm going to go for a 2-0 Eastleigh win. Moving on to the next fixture that we're going to have a look at, it will be Gateshead versus FC Halifax Town. Halifax have an excellent record against Gateshead. In my lifetime, and I shouldn't be saying this at this point, but because we're playing them on Saturday, but in my lifetime, Halifax have never lost to Gateshead. I think it's last time they beat us were like 2001. It was something like that, which is ridiculous. Is this the time you feel that Gateshead could finally defeat the Shermen, or
no?
No, I hope you're right.
Listen, Luke. They're two teams in transition, aren't they? I think at the moment, Gateshead got a 2-2 draw at Wealdstone last week. There's suggestions that Wealdstone probably didn't deserve to get a draw, probably deserved to win. I wasn't there, unfortunately. I didn't see the game, so I can't comment. But Gateshead we don't know what team are going to turn up. I spoke to Mickey the Heed fan who said that that they're a little bit soft in midfield. Is that an advantage to Halifax? I mean, Halifax don't look the most powerful side themselves, having seen them earlier this season. So look, just two teams in transition, two teams you don't know what you're going to get out of them, and I've gone with a 1-1 draw based on that fact.
I don't want to be biased with Halifax. However, from what I've seen, I'm not overly concerned so far this season, although we sit 17th in the league. I think there's certain individuals in there, like every season, that will certainly kick on, I feel. Against Eastleigh, a slow start, but I think shows a lot of character with the way that we actually came back from that game and picked up a result. As for Gateshead, I think I've been pretty clear in terms of what I think of them this season, and I think they've done a little bit better than I thought, but they're not going to compete for the playoffs. They're going to be a mid-table side, and potentially I'm biased, and I'm sure it'll be the opposite with Gateshead in terms of they'll say Halifax. I think I've seen signs of Gateshead so far this season. This will be Gateshead fans saying this. I think I've seen signs of Gateshead this season where there's that we can kick on and start picking up results. As for Halifax, they've been very mixed. So it's vice versa. But considering that I've seen Halifax play every single fixture and I've not seen a full game of Gateshead yet, I've only seen highlights. I think if Halifax get their tactics right, I think they'll be able to win this game. And someone's mentioned lots of goals. I think this season, Halifax are capable of scoring a fair few goals compared to what it's been like under Millington. And although we may not be strong defensively, I think we'll probably be able to score enough goals this season to make up for that. So I'm actually going to go for a 2-1 Gateshead, 2-1 Halifax win, I should say, overall. Like I've said, we have a very good record against the Heed, and I think they're quite a bit weaker than what they were last season, in my opinion, overall. Anything to add on this fixture, Paul?
No. I think it just depends what teams that they have turn up. How will they react? How will they play? They're two of those teams this season where they're real Jekyll and Hyde, and you don't know what you're going to get out of them. And neither, I said it's quite a lot. Neither team are going to want to lose, and I think because of that, it's going to be a 1-1 draw.
Moving on to the next fixture that we're going to have a look at, it will be, of course, Morecambe coming up against the mighty Stones in Wealdstone. Like we've said every week, plaudits to Wealdstone so far this season. They were a side for me in terms of sides. I think our predictions may look silly in terms of what I'd change. Wealdstone weren't far behind Boreham Wood. I still think, like I said, there's a lot of time in the part-time, and I think this will probably be the best one of the season for Wealdstone at the moment. I think as the season goes on, with them being part-time, they may potentially become weaker. However, I am at the moment thinking they are going to survive, if you get what I mean. Of course, they're coming up against the Morecambe side at the moment, who I think are still finding themselves. But as we've spoken, there's got to be a time where Morecambe start to pick up results. Of course, they picked up a good point away at Solihull last weekend. I actually think Morecambe might win this game. Sorry, Paul. I think they might, like what I said with the new additions, being at home, I think they're going to pick up results. I think they'll have a lot of confidence after clawing a point back at Solihull Moors last weekend. I'm going to go for a 2-1 Morecambe win. How do you see it going?
I was a little bit more hopeful maybe than before seeing that they'd signed yet another 4 players, Luke. They're an unknown quantity, and we've spoken about them at length this evening, and they've got to start getting results soon. Being a Wealdstone fan, I hope that isn't on Saturday. I'd much rather they start picking up results after Saturday. Listen, Wealdstone have had some really good news over the last week. They've had investment come in from a chap called Nick Semica, who was on the board of Leyton Orient, an American investor. He's willing to put some money in. Don't get me wrong, it's not life-changing money. Wealdstone aren't overnight going to become full-time, everything else. But it's a positive step in the right direction for the football club, and they're going to be buoyed by that. They won again in the National League Cup in the week. That they've got a little bit of momentum. They managed to get a draw out of Gateshead and played well on the weekend. So they're going to go to Morecambe with a lot of confidence. I think the problem with Wealdstone, and I'll say it a lot over the next few months, is we haven't got that goal scorer. We haven't got that Alex Reid we had last year. We do struggle in that forward area. We had a young lad called Nathan Young-Coombs who was a free agent who'd been in the Brentford Academy. He's come in, he's done his hamstring, he's come back, got himself fit, and he's done his hamstring again. So we're a little bit light up top for options. As we know, Daniel Nkrumah bust his shoulder at Scunthorpe, so he's out for a few months. So a little bit short up top, very, very powerful in midfield. I think our goalkeeper hasn't covered himself in glory over the last couple of weeks, and there may be a change there potentially. He's got to stop making mistakes, and ultimately Wealdstone has got to be better in both boxes to try and pick up a few more points. But they've done very well so far, don't get me wrong, and as IA79 said, it's how we feel Wealdstone's a pushover team. They're not to be taken like they're not. They are part-time, but the problem you've got there, Luke, is that they can or might be very fragile going forward. We're just very sceptical as a Wealdstone fan base that this good run can continue because of the budgets we have and the fact we're part-time. But long may it continue that we carry on doing as well as we are. I think we'll nick another point at the weekend away, and it will be 2-2.
I just want to address that comment because he said that I think Wealdstone are a pushover team. There's very few teams in this division I think are a pushover team. However, when you're in Morecambe's position as a football club, Wealdstone at home is a winnable game. That doesn't mean I think they're a pushover team. They've got Halifax coming up the week after. Do I think that Halifax is a pushover game? I've seen Halifax play. I've mentioned that tonight. However, when you look at where Halifax are in the division at the moment, you'd have to say it's a winnable game. Wealdstone, yes, have started well. However, what I'm going to say to that is they're part-time. That doesn't make them a pushover team, but Morecambe are full-time. If you're playing against anyone who's part-time in this division, that's a winner. That's a game where it's a winnable game in my opinion, particularly when you're at home, against a side that's part-time as well, coming all the way up from London. I personally feel that that's a winnable game, if that makes sense overall.
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah, but moving on to the next fixture that we're going to have a look at overall, we're going to look at Scunthorpe versus Truro. Two newly promoted sides. Of course, Truro won the National League South. Only have had one victory so far in the National League. They're coming up against Scunthorpe United, who got off to a great start so far. Of course, nearly picked all 3 points up away at Forest Green Rovers. And although they do remain unbeaten, Scunthorpe, Forest Green did come back in the dying stages. I think one thing I will say about Truro, though, is they've not been battered in many games so far this season. I think Carlisle's the only side who potentially could say is, I won't even go as far to say it's a battering, but they beat them by 3-0. I think for this game, Scunthorpe will narrowly win this 1-0. How do you see it going?
I've actually gone for a scunny 3-0 win. They're playing with a huge amount of confidence. I know they let it slip in the 98th minute last week. But I think, Truro are just quite a lightweight side. And if Scunthorpe can get it right in that forward area, they're very capable of scoring goals. And I think, they're going to go down there and they're going to want to keep that playoff push. They're not going to want to be towards the bottom end where many expected them to possibly be, being newly promoted. They're going to want to try and get points on the board. And I think they'll convincingly win on Saturday and will get a 3-0 win.
Apparently, Askey turned down an approach from Solihull in the last 2 weeks. I've not heard anything about that, but it was kind of a rumour for me that I thought would be a good fit for Solihull Moors. But I think it says a lot for Truro, for him as well, to turn down the opportunity to go to Solihull, who I think have probably got in a slightly better position to potentially attract players as well. And, I think have certainly got more finances as well. But we'll move on to the next fixture that we'll have a look at, and it will be Tamworth versus Yeovil. Of course, Danny Webb's first game, I believe, for Yeovil Town. Probably not the ideal opening game away from home at a Tamworth side who they're one of those sides I don't think anyone particularly likes to go to away from home. I think it'll be quite a low scoring one, me, but I got an impression under Danny Webb. I did like him at Chesterfield. I think he was kind of underrated because he was, of course, the assistant there, but I think he did quite a lot for them behind the scenes. I'm going to go for a 1-0 Yeovil win away from home to get Danny Webb's start at Yeovil. Under a good start. How do you see it going?
I've gone the reverse. I've gone 1-0 to Tamworth, but I think you're right. It'd be interesting to know what Junior Mariah's fan club and any other Yeovil fans that listen think of the appointment of Danny Webb. It's a bit of a left field choice. We were talking about choices, thinking outside the box for Sutton. I think Yeovil have gone that way. They haven't gone down that tried and tested route of names that we would consider. Danny Webb has got an awful lot of experience in the National League as a player, as a coach, as an assistant. And he now feels it's his time to become a manager of a National League team. Yeovil is a great club to become a manager of, in terms of the stature they have within the National League, the infrastructure, potentially the investment from the new owners. They're more settled off the pitch, and if he can get them going, they will definitely, get Hewish Park bouncing and fans coming back. So, a good appointment in that sense. I like to see people like Danny Webb get given the opportunity rather than going back to your Cottrells of this world. Saying that, Tamworth need the points. They are at home. They're very industrial. They will, really going to get at Yeovil. And I've gone with a Tamworth 1-0 win, but I think you're right. It's going to be low scoring. Could go either way. So I've gone with a 1-0 win for Tamworth.
Moving on to the next fixture, Woking versus Forest Green Rovers. Forest Green, of course, remain unbeaten. But they left it late to keep that unbeaten run going after scoring a late equaliser against Scunthorpe. As for Woking, it felt like they turned a corner under Ardley. They were starting to become a very difficult team to beat, yet were defeated in the dying stages against Yeovil last weekend away from home. They've got a funny feeling. I think Woking, I still think overall this season, they're going to become a very hard team to beat. And I think being at home, this is a particularly tricky game for Forest Green, in my opinion, overall. I'm actually going to go for a draw for this one. I'm going to go for a 1-1 draw. How do you see it going?
I've gone with a 2-1 win to Forest Green. I think you're right, Lutis. You look at Forest Green, they haven't lost yet. They appear to be grinding out results. I don't know how well, how dominant they've been. I know when we spoke to Robbie Savage a couple of weeks ago, look at their XG and but they're not scoring bundles of goals. If you look at their last 5, 1-1, 1-1-0. Okay, beat Forest Green 3-1, drew 0-0, 1-1-0. So they're not scoring bundles of goals. They've only let 5 in. And then when you look at Woking have let 13 in and only scored 11. So it's going in Forest Green's favour. I think Woking have vastly improved over the last few weeks, and they had to. I saw them early on this season. I thought they were terrible, and was really surprised at how poor they were across the pitch. But I think Forest Green will grind another one out, and win 2-1. If they sign Chris Conn-Clarke by the deadline to be able to play at the weekend on tomorrow, that might improve their chances, but that's unlikely to happen. So, I think Robbie Savage will go with what he's got. He made 4 changes in the first minute in the National League Cup the other day, so he's going to keep his squad fresh, and I think they'll win 2-1.
Like I said, I think I had Woking 7th, and that's probably one of the other predictions. Maybe I'm disagreeing with now. I still think they'll be fine from relegation. I think that run of form before that defeat to Yeovil kind of gave me the indication that I think they'll be okay. Is Robbie Savage here tonight? Potentially he's tuning in. Of course, he did last time, which kind of shocked me before, of course, it came on the channel. And like I said, Rob, if you're ever free on a Thursday again and you want to come on, drop Paul a message and we'll happily have you on once again. But no, if I'm being honest, I think this could potentially be a draw. Like I said, I think Woking defensively, although they've conceded 13 goals, I think they'll become a lot better defensively. I think if you look at the 3 centre halves in the back 5 that they play there, I think they've got some very experienced players in terms of Oddie Sina, of course, who has previously been at Hartlepool and Bradford City, Richards as well, and the other name as well, who I think is quite high profile, has gone out my head anyway. But no, like I've said, I think Woking defensively, they're quite well structured, particularly as under Neil Ardley. And I think they'll probably be suited to play against the better sides, if that makes sense. Moving on to the next fixture that we're going to have a look at, it will, of course, be York City versus Solihull Moors. This is quite an easy prediction for me. I'm going to go for a 3-1 York City win and keep Stuart Maynard's 100% record at York City since he's been appointed as manager. How do you see it going, Paul?
I've gone with a very similar score. I've gone with York City 4, Solihull 1. Solihull haven't got a manager at the moment. They've got is it James Quinn in charge on an interim basis. Solihull could be better than they are, but I think York could, under Stuart Maynard, have just sort of carried on where they were last season, if that makes sense. And if anything, he's just improved that team a little bit in the way they play, potentially. The way that Maynard plays with the forward line York have got, as I said before, they've got the ability to score goals, and they've shown that's what they're able to do. So I think they'll do it again. They are at home. They're going to be buoyed by the fact they're unbeaten in the last 3, and they'll continue that with a 4-1 win.
Of course, Ollie Banks out injured for this fixture. I still don't think it will cause York any issues. Of course, Hunt, since he's come back into the starting 11, he's been excellent under Stuart Maynard. I think since Stuart Maynard's come in, he's probably been the poster boy for York City, hasn't he? Since that appointment was made, I think he's already scored 3 goals in his last 2 fixtures too, for the Minster men. But we'll move on to, I think, which is the final fixture of the game week, and it is, of course, Rochdale versus Southend United. Something key as well to mention for this one: Manny Disarouwe will be out suspended for Rochdale in this fixture, which may change your prediction, Paul. As for Southend, there's been a few fixtures, hasn't there? I think there's probably been 2 games so far this season where you've probably looked at them and gone, maybe they're not the finished article in terms of winning the title. And that, of course, will be the defeat to Wealdstone and then dropping points last week to Boston. As for Rochdale, an excellent start. I think they only dropped points in 1 fixture, which was a defeat to Brackley, where we know they made 11 changes. I think Southend will be able to get something here, though. I think they're a very hard team to beat. Rochdale will be seeking for revenge after the playoffs, but with Manny Disarouwe out injured, Southend know how to beat Rochdale. Of course, they beat them twice last season, I believe. And I think they'll be able to get a result here. So I'm going to go for a 2-2 draw. How do you see it going?
I've gone for exactly the same, Luke, 2-2. Game of the weekend, I think anyone would agree. Two good. I think the problem with Southend at the moment is they're probably not playing as well as they should. They are getting results on the whole, but I think their fans. I saw one of their fans in the week. Someone I work with goes and watches Southend. And he said it's not so much the results they're getting; it's the way they're playing. He was just a little bit concerned that they're not playing as well as they probably could. Is that a sign of a good team? They're still getting results invariably with not playing too well. I think it's what when they came down to the Vale, they just didn't really show up, and they did get beat. But apart from that, they seem to be doing okay and getting results. But I think the consensus is they could be better. Rochdale, on the other hand, you look at them, they're doing very, very well, aren't they? And actually, when I saw them down at the Vale, I thought they were probably the best team that we've played Wealdstone so far. And I think someone commented earlier in the chat that they could see them going all the way, and that's definitely true for them. But this is a real tough, proper National League game, isn't it? That this one is, and I agree with you that they're going to be hard to separate, and it will be a 2-2 draw.
I think we want the big 5, I suppose, the 5 big hitters, which I think we can all agree will be this season, to be playing against each other, because they haven't so far, and there's no real indication for me of one of those sides going on to kind of rump the league, if that makes sense overall so far in the opening 8 or 9 fixtures. So it's good that, we've got another fixture here where 2 of those 5 sides are playing against each other, albeit Southend have already played against York themselves. But, we haven't seen many fixtures where, a Rochdale have played a Forest Green or a York have played a Carlisle, if that makes sense overall. So I'm happy to see another fixture between the 5 sides. But no, certainly should be a cracker. And as you've mentioned, it probably is game of the game week. That wraps up the preview show. Thanks to everyone that's tuned in tonight. Please remember to like and subscribe. It genuinely does go a long way if you do that. As I always say, I know it is a cliche, but it doesn't take much effort, if we're being totally honest, to press 2 buttons or so. So I would appreciate it if you could like and subscribe. But Paul, as always, thank you very much for joining me tonight.
No problem, Luke. Enjoy your night out tonight in the indie club.
Yeah, of course. As everyone's aware, I've started at university now, and as it's Freshers Week, I'm going out tonight once again. Yeah, but no, I'm delighted that I've been able to do this once again, and the podcast will be continuing. I know people have asked about that with university, and if anything, I'm hoping with kind of what I'll be taught and potentially opportunities that I may get, that it could potentially even become better in the future, if that makes sense overall. But as always, I always say this, I do genuinely appreciate every single one of you that has tuned in tonight. It genuinely does mean a lot as we're hosting this podcast. Please check out our sponsors, Cards Accepted. There's a link in the description for you to do that. You'll get 50% off your card machine. No contracts or monthly fees. And if you'd like to become a channel member, it is just £2.99 a month. You'll get early access to exclusive interviews that we'll do in the future. And of course, you get custom emojis for your specific football club to use in the live chat too. That's enough of me waffling. Like I've already said, thanks to everyone that's tuned in. Thanks to Paul as well for joining me once again. And we will see you next time. Bye for now.
Ciao.